In a previous video, the link to which you can see on the screen now, I explained that once you've picked the story that you feel perfectly illustrates the point you want to make, you have to tell it in a way that is interesting to the whole of the audience. For example, if you have a story about baseball, how do you make that interesting to people who don't like baseball? And I explained how there were two main ways of doing this, which was to introduce surprise and also human interest. Now, if you haven't watched that video yet, I recommend that you watch it before you watch this one, because this one will make a lot more sense if you do so. I'm about to tell you a story as an example of that point. Now, this story could be used if you were trying to get people within your company to look at things from a different perspective. Maybe a rule, a process, something like that. And if you are going to use this story to open your presentation, then don't preface it with any greeting, self-introduction, hi, it's good to see you, thanks for having me. You get on your feet and the first words out of your mouth should be the first line of the story, which is, it's 1916 and Major General Alexei Kuropatkin of the Russian Imperial General Staff is excited. He feels as if his whole career has been building up to this point. On the Eastern Front, after a few initial German successes, the war has bogged down into defensive, static trench warfare, just as it has done in Belgium and France. And neither the Russian nor the German army seem to have the faintest idea how to break the impasse. But Kuropatkin has had a brainwave. This idea of his is so new, it's so different, it's so revolutionary is the only word, that they're going to use the victory he's about to win as a case study in the Imperial Staff College. They'll mention his name in the same breath as Frederick the Great, Napoleon, maybe even Prince Alexander Nevsky, the Russian hero who saved Russia from invasion by the Germans back in the 13th century. You see, in the early years of the 20th century, armies didn't really fight at night. They never trained for it, so if they tried, they literally would have got lost and fallen over each other. But it also just wasn't really regarded as the done thing. It was a bit ungentlemanly. It was almost as if there was an unwritten rule that all the great powers had signed up to. All, of course, apart from the dastardly Japanese, who used it against the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War a decade earlier. Now, the Russians eventually dealt with that by using a new technology, the Searchlight, and they would light up their own defensive positions at night to prevent the Japanese creeping up and attacking under cover of darkness. Now, Kuropatkin fought in that war, and in his mind at least, he was unfairly blamed for a number of the Russian defeats, but this new idea of his is going to wipe the slates clean and restore his honor. His idea is to use searchlights offensively for the first time in the history of warfare. He's going to light up the German lines and launch a surprise night attack. Now, the Germans won't know what's hit them. They've never used searchlights in any military capacity, and they won't know how to respond. Caught by surprise, dazzled by the searchlights, it will give his elite Grenadier Corps the opportunity to slice through the German lines like a hot knife through butter, perhaps even steamroller all the way to Berlin. He starts to dream about the rewards that will be his. Promotion to a higher command, perhaps of the whole Eastern Front. Decorations, well, they're a given. Most of all, it'll give him the undying thanks and gratitude of his Emperor, His Excellency Tsar Nicholas, and also the opportunity to wipe the smiles off the faces of his detractors. And so in early 1916, the order to attack is given, and the German lines are lit up like a Christmas tree with dozens of huge, dazzling searchlights. Kuropatkin waits eagerly in his command post behind the lines for the first news of what will be the first Russian victory of the war. But the Germans aren't caught by surprise. The massive artillery bombardment which preceded every attack in those days has alerted them to the fact that something was going to happen. And down at ground level in the trenches, they're not even blinded by the searchlights. All they can see is that, amazingly, incomprehensibly, the Russians just seem to be lighting up their own attack for them. They can see thousands upon thousands of Russian troops marching as if on the parade ground, perfectly silhouetted by huge, dazzling searchlights. They almost don't even have to aim their machine guns, just point them in the general direction of the advancing Russian troops, and 8,000 men are killed in the first attack. Instead of earning the undying thanks and gratitude of his Tsar, Kuropatkin is stripped of his rank and spends the rest of the war in disgrace as the governor of Turkestan. Instead of being seen as the savior of Mother Russia, he spends the rest of the war putting down bandit uprisings. You know, sometimes when something's looked at from one perspective, it seems like a great idea, but from another perspective, not so much. Take our minimum delivery rule, for example. Now, when looked at from the perspective of saving costs, it's a great idea. It saves us a lot of money. But when it's looked at from the perspective of customer service, it's an unmitigated disaster. Or take our policy on minimum deliveries. Now, when looked at from an internal perspective, it's a great idea. After all, it makes our life a lot easier. But when looked at from an external perspective, from the customer's viewpoint, it makes us look uninterested, inflexible, and intransigent.